Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen, out in crypto land? Node Investor here. Want to bring you guys an update on BTC following this crazy weekend we had. The extreme bearishness, the selling hit a peak, and we finally saw a bottom and a good bounce, specifically in the alts, and that's good news. Seeing some of those alts finally rally, many of them having very strong rallies off of the lows. And I'll go into some of that, some of my strategy here. Near term, the last couple days, I've been leaning more alt, and primarily just from a bounce. Just they were just so overdone to the downside. Some of the prices we were seeing at the lows, wow. And so we're going to get into some of that, but let's take a look at the charts first here. This is Bitcoin 4-hour on Bitstamp. And so you can see here off the lows, pretty decent move from the lows that we saw around 7,300 or so. The volume was okay. I mean, if you go to the hourlies, it's pretty good. It's not like mega bullish volume like we saw here at the lows in February where we rallied off, and this was pretty extreme at the lows. But nonetheless, the price action is pretty positive. We're at least bouncing from some extreme bearishness to the downside, and the sentiment values. I mean, they're just looking at some of these social spheres, some of the videos that were coming out, some of the guys that have been putting out videos only as of late. You know, we're hitting some pretty extreme bearishness, and you know, everybody was calling for 1,000 Bitcoin. And so, if you missed it, I published my newsletter on Friday declaring crypto is not dead. A little bit of an encouragement piece. Wasn't necessarily calling the bottom, but just trying to put some things into perspective. So if you missed that, go check it out. You can also find it linked on my Twitter at Node Investor. But we did hit some pretty good low levels here, and we were due for a bounce. And so everyone's wondering, what next? Is this the low? Is it the low? Are we finally turning the corner here? And so let's examine some of the price action here. Couple of things to look at. Over the weekend on Friday, if you followed me on Twitter, I was talking about a potential falling wedge pattern that I was looking at forming here, and you can see the low end there. Let me clear the volume just to kind of clean the charts up a little bit, but that was the pattern I was watching. And there was a couple of things to look at on this pattern, right? One, it was getting narrower and narrower as it was coming down, and on Friday when I posted this, we were right here. We were bouncing into the trend line, and I said, hey, maybe we see one more test to the low mid 7Ks, and then we break the trend from there. So far, that's playing out pretty good. And there was a couple of things I was looking at. One was this declining wedge pattern. The other thing, I've been talking about this probably for too long now, but this double top pattern that we've been watching. And if you look at the downside projection on that double top, and this is just a guide, it's never exact, but it's a good rule of thumb, and kind of gives you a feel for how low could this really go. The double top pattern downside projection was around 7,300. And so if you look at that, the low of this wedge was also around that 7,300. You know, so in and around 74, down a little bit higher than 77,000 was the area that I was looking for as a potential bottom or a potential bounce zone. The other thing to look at too was the RSI. And so you guys know I use this a lot, and this is a good indicator, especially when it comes to spotting divergences in the pattern. And so here you can see the price continued lower for the last few days, but look at the RSI. It was starting to move higher as the price was moving lower. And that was telling me that, hey, the downside momentum was starting to wane a little bit. The wedge pattern, by definition, tells you that the sellers are coming in faster than, or excuse me, the buyers are coming in faster than the sellers. And so the pattern was kind of narrowing there, and we saw that building. And so this is some good confirmation that we were at least due for a bounce. We saw that bounce. We saw the break of the trend. And now the question is, was that the low? Are we done, or are we looking for some more downside testing? So there's a couple of things that I want to point out. So first, if this was a wedge pattern that we're playing out, let's take a little bit of a conservative measurement, and we could do a measured move similarly to the other patterns. And let's say from the breakout point up, you get around 9,700, give or take. So $9,700 to $9,800. Now, does that match up with anything? It sure does. It matches up with some resistance here and here. So from that perspective, hey, that makes sense. Could be a good place for a bounce to kind of end there. Near term, however, the other area that I'm watching is this 9K zone, and I'll get into this here in a minute. So if we do a fib retracement on that bounce, let's say from peak to peak, from the top to the most recent low in that low 7,300 range, there's two levels that I'm going to be watching. First is that 382 level. Right now that has us just shy of 9K, and that's a key level that I'm watching right now. And then above that puts us around 10K on this bounce, which just happens to line up with that other target on the upside. Now, I wouldn't expect it to get as high as 10K personally. I'd probably be expecting to see a little profit taking going into that resistance above 9,500, but that's a pretty good zone to be looking at if this bounce continues to get legs. So that 9,500 to 10K, 9,700 to 10K, kind of in that area is going to be the upside target that I'm watching for this bounce. Now, if it gets much higher than that, that's going to be very bullish, but clearly these things don't go straight up, straight down. And so that's the more intermediate target that I'm watching if we can confirm that this was a pretty good low. Now, let's zoom in a little bit and see the action over the last few hours or so. There's a couple of price points to watch. One, that psychological 9K area. The other thing is this little bit of what prior was support here. So right around 86, 8,700. We bounced, we tried to rally, and then we failed over the weekend. And then we came down, rallied right into that. That level became an area of resistance. And then we had the low finally here around the 7,300. And we bounced right into that here a few hours ago, and we're seeing a little bit of a pause. But this is actually really positive because this is good kind of secondary testing of the low. Is this the low? And so I'm watching a couple of patterns potentially play out. One, we need to clear this resistance. That'd be good confirmation. Getting above that, and then 9K is kind of the real test in my opinion. And then above that, the target that I'm watching going into 10K. So these are kind of some of the near-term targets. But how this could play out in the very short term is we had this rally. I was looking for a pullback. We finally saw that pullback. Very short term, the levels I was watching were around 8,200. And so those are the levels that I was watching on this pullback. And that's just this little flag that we built out over the last day or so after that big bar to the upside. And so I'm watching this here as a potential zone for some support. So right around 9,200. And if that doesn't hold, then what I'm going to be watching for is I don't want it to get lower than this low back here. And that puts us at around, 7,700 or so to retest the downside. Because if we can hold that low, we could potentially be forming a nice inverted head and shoulder pattern on the chart here. And that would be a very bullish reversal signal if we can do this pattern somewhere along these lines, put an inverted head and shoulder, and then break out basically around the same neckline at 8,600 or so. And so either way, if it pulls back here and decides to break out, this confirms a pretty good double bottom on the chart here, with the second bottom undercutting the first and RSI diverging positive. And so all of those signals are lining up, leaning bullish in the near term. But we got to confirm, and so that's what we're doing now over this next few hours, the next day or so. We'll see how this action plays out. Again, a breakout above this would be very positive, would confirm some more upside momentum. And even a pullback wouldn't be that bad depending on how far down it goes. We don't want to see it head all the way back down here because I don't think this low would hold. I'd rather see a higher low and then go from there. So all around, I'm feeling pretty good. From the near-term perspective, I got this bullish momentum index on here. You can see the hourlies are waning a little bit, which is what leads me to believe maybe we'll see some more downside. But the longer time frames, the 4-hour, has shot up pretty good into the high 90s on my index, which is good. This volume here on the breakout bar was very strong. Let me go back to that here. So you can see the volume there on that move was pretty good. And we go to the 1-hour bar. That was basically like a 7 or 8% bar in 1 hour. At the peak it was 9%, but it finished just over 7%, but 7% up in 1 hour on very strong volume off the lows. is positive action. So the momentum has certainly shifted in the near term in favor of the bullish side. And so I'm leaning bullish. Certainly started entering some trades yesterday, buying some of these dips that we're seeing. And let's go to some of the alts. These alts have been very strong. I'm going to go to the coin market cap here first. So we're back above 300 billion. Yay. Finally, right? But look at the total market cap. In February, when we're hitting that extreme selling, we bottomed out around 279. And here over the weekend, we bottomed out around 280s or so. And so pretty good to see. It was really close to that level, held slightly higher. Now that alt picture is not as strong, right? So if you look at the total market cap excluding Bitcoin, in February, we hit a low of around 178. And then here over the weekend, around 152. But that makes sense considering the action that the alts have seen over the last month or so. They've just been very hit hard over the BTC comparative. And we can see that here in the BTC dominance chart. I've been talking about this edging higher. I was looking for it to be in the high 40s, maybe almost 50 by April. We hit a high of around 45% dominance here before we saw this little rally. And so we could still continue to climb higher, especially if Bitcoin continues to outperform some of the heavier weighted names on this index, such as Bitcoin Cash and then Ripple, right, where they carry a lot of weight on this index. So if Bitcoin can continue to outperform those names, which I think it probably will, then we can see this climb higher. But what I'm looking at is kind of the middle tier and smaller cap names. Those are very strong. And I'm thinking we're going to see a little bit of a counter trend rally on this where they will start to outperform Bitcoin, which is why most of my trades here over the last day or so have been primarily in the alts and just kind of capitalizing on some of that outperformance in near term. And so I think we'll see a little bit of a counter trend rally, maybe some dominance dropping back to the low 40% range, and we'll have to go from there. So let's take a look at some of those alts. Some of the names that I've been watching here, very oversold over the weekend. If you look at names like Cardano, we're hitting some pretty extremes to the downside. If you look at the USD pair on that as well, that's been down here pretty low. But Cardano hit a pretty good low point, saw some strong rally off the low. Here's the hourlies versus BTC. So not only holding up well versus Bitcoin, but outperforming pretty nicely. And so moving up off the lows there. EOS, man, has had a very strong day. Let me clear that here. I was doing some analysis earlier. Getting a little bit in the overbought region here, so need this to cool off a little bit, but very strong move off the low. You can see EOS is up about 20% here in the last few hours. QTUM, what a move QTUM has had. Let me go to QTUM here so you can see how strong this guy has been, up 40% from the lows, and just very strong action here on the USD pair, just clearing this resistance right now. Let me show you the line I was watching. It was bouncing right into resistance, hitting that moving average. So very good action, good volume coming in off the lows, and you're starting to see some positive action on a lot of names where, you know, they're just bouncing very strongly from these extreme oversold conditions that we saw over the weekend, where it just felt like things were in free fall. And when you start to see that kind of action, you want to start paying attention, because I talk about it often. Even if it's not the low, there is always a reversion to the mean. There tends to be these periods where we go exponential, whether it's to the upside like we saw up here, or whether it's to the downside, right? And after a big drop, you're seeing this, and all of a sudden the price just kind of goes exponential to the downside. Those tend to mark the extremes on the up and the downside. And so we saw that again this weekend, where prices were dropping. They had already been down pretty good for a couple of weeks, and then just over the last 2 days, bam, we just saw prices just fall off the ledge. And that tends to mark some of the extremes that we saw, and we're seeing the flip side of that, where they're kind of overcorrecting that and bouncing very nicely. And so we're seeing some good moves to the upside. A couple of other names that I'm watching here. NEO was in the 40s. NEO undercut to $50 and went into the $48 range. Incredible. And so bouncing here pretty good. Picked some up off the lows there a little bit. So we'll see if that's, you know, at this point, a lot of these could just end up being bounces. So I'm still leaning cautious, certainly taking some trades, but you still got to remain cautious until the longer term picture starts to turn. We haven't seen that yet, but we're seeing the early signs of that, and we just need some confirmation. We'll see if this is anything more than just a bounce. Binance Coin is another one I've been watching, has been sitting tight, especially versus BTC is looking pretty good. So kind of range bound right now. See if this one can move out of range. And then just looking at the bigger names. So Litecoin had a pretty good move off of the lows, was in the 130s and rallied as high as 163, pulling in a little bit. So far, it's a decent pullback. It's an expected pullback after that strong move higher, and we'll see how that one plays out. Versus BTC, though, I want to see this one start outperforming. Not really outperforming Bitcoin yet, and just so far bouncing into that moving average. And the same with Ethereum. I want to see Ethereum start outperforming here. You can see BTC still weak relative to Bitcoin overall, seeing a lot of selling pressure there. On the USD side, if it can break out above that 160 range or so, then maybe we see it start outperforming Bitcoin. So it's kind of a mixed bag out there. There's certainly some very strong names like we've seen, QTUM, for example, and then there's the other ones that are still not yet turning the corner here. So a few names that I'm looking at. That's going to be it for now, guys. I appreciate you all watching. I will be posting a scheduled live stream here soon, so look out for that, and we can go a lot more in depth in some of the charts that you guys want to look at. Till next time, take care, everyone.